let's get back to the riddle. How did those bees make honey out of the dead carcass of that rent lion? This was really an amazing thought to Samson. Well, before we examine how the bees could have made honey out of the dead lion, the question we need to ask ourselves, how do bees naturally make honey?
Bees make honey because it provides an important food source for them. In order to produce honey, bees must gather a sweet liquid called nectar from flowers. A worker bee flies to a flower and sucks up the nectar with its long tongue. The tongue is a flexible tube on the outside of the bee's head. The nectar goes through the bee's mouth and into the honey stomach, where it is stored. The honey stomach is located in the bee's abdomen. Inside the honey stomach, enzymes, which are protein molecules that speed up chemical reactions, help transform the sugar in the nectar into two simple sugars, fructose and glucose. This process is called inversion. The worker bee stores nectar in its hive. It regurgitates or spits up the inverted nectar back through its mouth. It either gives the nectar to other bees or puts it in empty, six-sided compartments called cells. Bees then put wax caps on the cells to seal them. The warmth of the beehive causes water in the nectar to evaporate.
As we have seen, honeybees have two stomachs. They have their stomach and they have a honey stomach or a honey sac. And as we've seen, the bees, they go to flowers and they drink nectar, the sweet substance, and it goes into their honey stomach and they go back to the beehive and finish production. So the question we need to ask ourselves, how did those honeybees make honey out of that dead lion? Well, as we discussed, that dead lion is a symbol of Jesus Christ. I believe the lion was dead, but I do also believe that that dead lion had some meat that was edible for the bees, and it was alive, which is a mystery. I believe with all my heart and soul that the bees drank nectar from the lion. But I believe that it wasn't the nectar of the flowers. I believe, although that lion was dead, that his blood was still alive. I believe those bees drank the blood of that dead lion, and they got it into their honey sacs, and they went to the beehive and to let other bees know about this food source. It's really interesting to know. What I believe systematically is that there was a bee. After Samson killed that lion, there was a bee just looking for flowers and eating nectar. But when it got closer to that dead lion, there was something sweet. There was a sweet aroma to that dead lion. I believe that bee went and it observed that dead lion, that the food that was edible was the blood of that dead lion, and it was so sweet and it was so good to that bee. And I also believe that the meat of that body of that lion was also edible, so that bee had a feast. And it's really interesting to know that whenever a bee would find a good food source, it would go back to the beehive and to let the bees know where to go get some good food. That bee that found good food would do something that's called a waggle dance.
You see, this bee is dancing, and the direction it makes tells the bees in what direction they have to fly out with respect to the sun. And speed and intensity of the dance is an indication of how good the food source is.
I believe that honeybee gave the biggest waggle dance in the history of all the bees of this good food source. I believe the intensity of that, the waggle dance, and it got all the attention of the bees, and all the bees were like, what is this good food that you ate? And I believe somehow that bee told him it was not flowers from a nectar, but come down to this place, and where there are a lot of flowers, but in the center maybe of all this flower there's a dead lion, and his blood is sweet. It's like the sweetest nectar you have ever tasted, and the meat of that lion is so good. And all these bees went speedily to the place of that dead lion, and it became a lion hive. Wow, isn't that so amazing? Wow, I believe that is the situation that did take place. Did you know Jesus presented Samson's riddle, him being that lion, to his own people, his own congregation, in the book of John 6?
Stop grumbling among yourselves! People cannot come to me unless the Father who sent me draws them to me. And I will raise them to life on the last day. The prophets wrote, Everyone will be taught by God. Anyone who hears the Father and learns from him comes to me. This does not mean that anyone has seen the Father. He who is from God is the only one who has seen the Father. I am telling you the truth. He who believes has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the desert, but they died. But the bread that comes down from heaven is of such a kind that whoever eats it will not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. If you eat this bread, you will live forever. The bread that I will give you is my flesh, which I give so that the world may live.
This started an angry argument among them.
How can this man give us his flesh to eat? I am telling you the truth. If you do not eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you will not have life in yourselves. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood have eternal life, and I will raise them to life on the last day. For my flesh is the real food, my blood is the real drink. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood live in me, and I live in them. The living Father sent me, and because of him I live also. In the same way, whoever eats me will live because of me. This, then, is the bread that came down from heaven. It is not like the bread that your ancestors ate but then later died. Those who eat this bread will live forever.
Jesus said this as he taught in the synagogue in Capernaum. Many of his followers heard this and said, "This teaching is too hard. Who can listen to it?"